phase rotation using digital converters in a hybrid audio workstation. Phase rotation. Let's talk about phase rotation. I'm Numb Thumb, and this is Warheart Arts. Now, audio conversion rotates your phase. Every DAC and ADC has latency, the time it takes to convert your audio into digital or your digital back into an analog audio. Hybrid studios, like mine, are out of phase. Any modern DAW will compensate for many different latencies across multi-tracks, but the analog realm will not. Thus, hybrid systems have this phasing issue in spades. If you use any digital hardware such as guitar pedals, lexicons, Ultra FX virtualizers, certain outdated Alesis and Samson and TC Electronics hardware, it's digital, it's going to have latency. A lot of things like that. I think you know what phasing is. Let's play Pretengineer for a minute. What is phasing? You are familiar with phase inversion. The underside of a drum is opposite the top, so you'll want to click invert the phase on that microphone or that track later. But consider a color wheel. Look at the color wheel. There is a whole spectrum of drift between a color and its opposite inverted color. Any deviation along that drift is now unparalleled. It's unparalleled to the original, but probably not fully inverted. That's called rotated. It's somewhere on the rotation. And it can be real subtle enough to be totally acceptable, or it can be so bad it's super phasey, but not fully across the spectrum to be inverted. You can't fix it by inversion. I always say, go hybrid. Go hybrid. I love the hybrid approach, but hybrid studios are out of phase, as I said. The modern DAW, any modern DAW will compensate for that, but not in a strictly analog realm. And when you go hybrid, you're getting some of both, depending how you do it. If you have any digital effects on insert in the hardware analog realm, you got the insert jack. That could be going to anything, equalizers and compressors and all kinds of cool stuff. But if you have a digital effect on insert, those are now going to be not in phase to where it was without it. If you have stems going out an aux, that you made some stems, like a drum bus, your buses with a digital insert will be out of phase from the analog members over on the tracks. So you can't parallel a dry track over here in the analog realm with its digitized clone that's on an aux or anywhere else without getting this phase rotation to some degree. You're going to hear it. You hear that in that ringy, SE, extra funky, phasey, reverby. We all know what phasing is. Sometimes it's cool if that's what you want right there, but if you don't want phasing deliberately, you don't want it. Now you're going to say, what about reverbs? Okay, a side effect, timing effects like reverb and delay. Reverb in particular, set to full wet, won't suffer this because reverb is by nature a fast delay with phasey characteristics. That's the tone of the reverb. If the digital reverb is not set to full wet inside the unit, the phase can sound much worse for reverbs. You should keep that full wet and blend it on the return fader or knob in the analog console. Even analog gear does affect phase rotation sometimes. Often, in fact. Point in question number one is mic distance. If you're using two different mics to mic the same guitar cabinet, moving them, any one of them moving it a tiny bit away from the other is rotating that one from the other. And you might end up having to go all the way across the room to find another node where much of the frequencies coincide again. Otherwise, you got to try and get that mic exactly where the first mic is, which is very hard. All EQ is adjusting phase of certain frequencies, nudging it forward or backward so that the other ones are either muted down or pop out. Most modulation effects are phasey. All affect the phase in certain frequency notches. So sometimes you'll hear it worse, sometimes you won't. And that's why we get to play with all the different colors and varieties. Yeah, you don't get this effect so much with dynamics circuitry. Analog compressors tend to stay in phase, even in a chain. But digital conversion always affects the phase in some way, and usually quite variably. And that's the trick. So what to do? Obviously, you can bring all those tracks back and the new tracks that you made with effects into a DAW and align them by some automatic and manual nudges, or remain out of the box DAWless and just count how many times you've used a digital thing and which one it was. You can keep track of that, keep track of the units that did conversion. Sometimes I'll even convert dry tracks through the same chain too, but keep it dry so that it's not really affecting. That way they remain parallel in latency. Or remove a unit if it's really not necessary to change the rotation closer to 0 or 180 degrees. And then you can invert it if it's at 180 degrees. You want to keep your stuff cohesive so you don't have phasing if you don't want it. Using rotation and inversion, we can get sounds back to their home on the color wheel. Purplish becomes yellowish when you invert it. And yellow plus yellowish is acceptably yellow, right? But no inversion can make red shift into yellowish. It's rotated too far. You'll want to further or lesser delay that to a different point of rotation, and then try inversion and see if that gets back to where you want. In this case, we're saying yellow is the top of the wave arc. These are the things that keep me up at night. This and saturation myths. I'm Numb Thumb. This is Warheart Arts.